Worthy of every song we could ever sing, worthy of all the praise we could ever bring. You're worthy of every breath we could ever breathe. We live for you. Jesus, the name above every other name. Jesus, the only one who could ever save. You're worthy of every breath we could ever breathe. We live for you. We live for you. Holy, there is no one like you. There is none beside you. Open up my eyes in wonder and show me who you are, and fill me with your heart and lead me in your love to those around me. Jesus, the name above every other name. Jesus, the only one who could ever save. You're worthy of every breath we could ever breathe. We live for you. Oh, we live for you. We sing holy, there is no one like you. There is none beside you. Open up my eyes in wonder and show me who you are, and fill me with your heart and lead me in your love to those around me. And I will build my life upon your love. It is a firm foundation, and I will put my trust in you alone, and I will not be shaken, and I will build my life upon your love. It is a firm foundation, and I will put my trust in you alone, and I will not be shaken. Holy, there is no one like you. There is none beside you. Open up my eyes in wonder and show me who you are, and fill me with your heart and lead me in your love to those around me. I will build my life upon your love. It is a firm foundation, and I will put my trust in you alone, and I will not be shaken. And holy, there is no one like you. There is none beside you. Open up my eyes in wonder and show me who you are, and fill me with your heart and lead me in your love to those around me.
Hello, church. Welcome to week 6 of our sermon series, Weathering the Storm. Now, this morning I was thinking through how did I want to start this passage that I'm about to read to you. And I was chugging my coffee and scrolling through Facebook or Instagram, as a lot of us tend to do. And a friend of mine who owns a health studio and very into health, and I learn all of my research basically from her own research. And she had posted this thing about how we need to drink more water. Now, obviously, this is something that we all know, but she was talking about how we actually, when we gain water weight in our bodies, it's because we aren't drinking enough water. It's not because we had too much water that day, but our bodies are meant to be balanced. And so, therefore, we go into survival mode. So, if we haven't had enough water, our water weight goes into survival mode. So, that's actually why. So, all on this side, I thought that was really interesting. And I also know that water's good for us. I know that I should drink more, but I also just really like coffee. And I realize sometimes I go through the whole day. I mean, if you've seen me at church, I usually have coffee with me. I work at a coffee shop. I make coffee all the time. And I realized that sometimes I get through my entire day without having any water at all. It's a problem. And it got me thinking, even though I know that water's good for me, I still don't drink it. What are the other things in my life that I know, but I just don't follow? And what does this mean for my spiritual life? And so with that, let's look at the passage I have for us today. And we're going to turn to Matthew chapter 7, and we're going to read just a few verses, verses 24 to 27. And it says, "Everyone then who hears these words of mine and acts on them will be like a wise man who built his house on rock. The rain fell, the floods came, and the winds blew and beat on that house, but it did not fall because it had been founded on rock. And everyone who hears these words of mine and does not act on them will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. The rain fell, the floods came, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell, and great was its fall." Now, this section of scripture that we just read is actually at the conclusion of the Sermon on the Mount. So if we read the couple chapters ahead of it, from 5 to 7, we read the Sermon on the Mount. And I know we've done a series on this at church, but just as a refresher, the Sermon on the Mount is a collection of sayings by Jesus organized by topic. This is salt and light, not serving two masters, money and possessions, anger, revenge, vows, etc. And so after he teaches all these things to his followers, he concludes by stating this section of scripture. He concludes by saying, whoever hears all these things that we've just talked about and doesn't do them and doesn't put them into practice is basically like a person building a house on sand. It's something that can easily be washed away. And much like my lack of water consumption, it does no good to know something but not put it into practice. And Jesus is telling those who had just listened to all these instructions that he gave to live by his example, to act on this example. And by doing this, you'll have a solid foundation in your faith and in your life. The storms that pop up in life, whether it be health issues or family drama or financial instability or even the coronavirus, they won't look as debilitating when we know that we have a solid foundation on Christ alone. Now, Jesus does explain the consequences of not heeding these instructions, of not doing God's will, of not acting wisely. This is when we hear the way we ought to live, but choose not to obey. This is when we choose coffee over water. This is shown through the example that he gives of a house built on sand. It's easily blown down by the storms that rise up. This can be seen when perhaps someone has crippling debt or health issues and they quickly lose their faith in God. Their foundation has not been built to last. And Jesus likens these foundations of rock and sand to the wise man and the foolish man. And this is an idea that's been prevalent throughout Scripture. He's likely hearkening back to wisdom literature, particularly the idea of lady wisdom and lady folly that we can find in the book of Proverbs. The wise person is the one who follows God's ways. They fear the Lord. Proverbs 3:7 states, "Do not be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and turn away from evil." The fool, however, is misled by lady folly and ignores God's ways. They follow the ways of the world and attempt to trick lady wisdom. I'd actually encourage you to read more about this in the book of Proverbs. It's evident that wisdom and folly battle back and forth. And I think what Jesus is doing in his conclusion on the Sermon on the Mount is reminding listeners of the reason that they ought to heed such advice. Wisdom and folly are always battling, but Jesus is giving instructions on how to live a life full of wisdom, if only we would follow it. And to wrap this all up, I want us to realize that we are building a house either way. But we need to look at the foundation. And we need to ask ourselves, is it rock or is it sand? Are we wise or are we fools? If issues arise in our lives and we lose faith in God through it, perhaps our foundation was not as sturdy as we actually thought it was. Luckily, Jesus tells us how to fix this. Listen to his words, follow his example, love God, love others, reflect God's character, be the wise person on building a solid foundation on rock. Be strong when the storms of life try to knock you down, and maybe drink some water once in a while. Follow God's ways, build your foundation on rock, and trust in the Lord at all times through every storm that comes in life.